UN Assistant Secretary General and an Ambassador of India. She is the first Indian woman to be appointed ASG of the United Nations. She is considered the founding mother of UN Women, the first global organization to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. She's opened the way for many, many others. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. Joining her on this stage is Ruchira Kamboj. She's the former Indian ambassador to the United Nations. She was India's first woman permanent representative to the United Nations, and across 3 decades, she skillfully guided discussions during global crises like the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ma'am, thank you for joining us here. Together, their work has showcased the power, the impact of Indian leadership on the world stage. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to invite onto the stage to take the discussion forward Palki Sharma, Managing Editor of Firstpost.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start this conversation, I want to tell you a quick story. It starts in 1949 when C.B. Muthamma became India's first woman IFS officer. She just cleared the civil service exam, and the interview board encouraged her to not take foreign service, saying that it was not a career suitable for women. She persisted. So they made her sign an undertaking that said that if she got married, she would have to resign. And in the years ahead, she faced many such barriers and rejections because a lot of her colleagues did not want to work with a woman. In 1979, she moved the Supreme Court of India because she was being overlooked for a promotion for being a woman. This was a case against the Ministry of External Affairs. They gave her a promotion in the hope that the case would be dismissed. That was then. Things have changed a lot since then. Thanks in no small part to the leadership and contribution of the 2 women who share the stage with me today. Ambassador Puri, Ambassador Kamboj, welcome to Shakti. Ambassador Puri, if I could start with you. You were the youngest entrant to the IFS, and you joined some 25 years after Muthamma. Would you describe your journey as remarkably different from hers, and what were the challenges that you faced and how did you overcome them?
Thank you, Palki. First of all, let me also pay a tribute to you as a pioneer. And there are many admirers of yours in the Foreign Service, because I think you've been the first person, quite apart from being the first woman, to have unpacked and demystified for both experts and lay people critical issues of national and international importance. So that's the first thing I would like to say. And we are here on stage with another pioneer who was the first to be, Ruchira, who was the first to be appointed the permanent representative of India by Modi ji. So this is something that I would like to emphasize, the role of pioneers. The role of pioneers like Muthamma ji was to clear the way for women like us. And indeed, it's not, to be a pioneer is, you cannot afford to be a beginner. And she was an amazing role model for all of us. Brilliant, dedicated, and represented India with distinction, and also shaped foreign policy Indian foreign policy over the years. But also, with every pioneer, you have an arrow in their backs, it is said, isn't it? So, as you have pointed out, when she joined, women were not allowed to be either married before or after, unlike men. And then, by the time I joined, they had just lifted that. But before that, 3 women Foreign Service officers resigned when they got married, including Rama Mehta, Jagat Mehta's wife. So it was, that had been set, and you have already talked about the case she won. But it took another 20 years for the first foreign secretary to be appointed, Chokila Iyer, in, I think, 2001. So there has been progress. And when I joined, it was a much more gender equal, systemically gender equal foreign service. And also, they have been, I would say that compared to other foreign services in the world, it is much more from the perspective of recruitment, the hours of recruitment, retention, re-entry, and promotion. Yeah. It is a very benign and women-friendly service. So I would pay tribute to that. But of course, there's always gender bias, and at the individual level, not systemic, gender biases that I faced. And sometimes it was a gender bias in the partner country that I was dealing with. That was the problem. And, I think I've shared with you stories about how in Japan I was first given an administrative task, and then I protested, and then I said, I want to do media work, and just give me 2 months and I will show you. And I did manage to really make ingress into the Japanese media. Similarly, when I was Under Secretary Pakistan, and I give credit to the ministry at that time, my predecessor was a woman, my 2 successors were women. This despite the fact that we had a very misogynist government in Pakistan at that time, Zia-ul Haq. And when I went as liaison officer with a Sikh Jatha, he refused to have me included in the delegation. I gate crashed with Mr. Natwar Singh. But even after reaching there, when he saw that I was part of their men's group, I was then told to go and have tea with Mrs. Zia. So that kind of thing we have faced. But otherwise, I have been blessed. And also in the UN, it is really systemically, a gender equal employer situation. But again, individual situations are always there. Individual culture and bias can always affect how you navigate these, these terrains.
I think for most of the world, it's still work in progress. Ambassador Kamboj, what inspired you to take up a career in diplomacy, and what were the unique challenges that you have faced at such senior levels, and how did you address them?
Well, thanks for having me, Palki. I'm delighted to be here, and my greetings to this wonderful audience. And it is always an honor to share the stage with Mrs. Lakshmi Puri. She's one of the role models for us, certainly for me. My story is one of a dream and circumstance. I was handed a dream by my father when I was very young, the dream of the Indian Foreign Service, probably 11 or 12, and I did not really comprehend the weight of what he had meant then. But when I was 16, in my very first year of college, I returned home to a different place. My father had died. The light had vanished from our house. His picture with the marigolds draped hung on the wall. And I remember I said the same thing they always do. The same thing that everyone says when they lose someone. But I just saw him. How could a human being of heartbeat and health, of flesh and blood, go so quickly? And death can be so cruel. We don't even get a chance to say goodbye. And I'm convinced that loss never leaves people. It becomes a part of who they are. And when I lost my father, and when I realized what that meant, I remembered his words, his dream, which then became my dream. The loss lit a fire within me which could not be doused. I would make his dream come true. And this was also my way to come to terms with the pain and the guilt and the fear. And another thing I'd like to share here today with all of you is that I never thought that I would make it to the civil services. In fact, the day the UPSC results were to come, I did not intend to go to the UPSC. But I remember, how can I forget that? The doorbell rang. And my mother jokingly said, just go and open it. Maybe the journalists are there. So I remember moving swiftly to the door, opening it, and lo, the journalists from Competition Success Review were there, breaking the news, informing me that I was the civil services topper amongst women for the 1987 batch. How did that even happen? How did that even happen? For somebody so unsure, so uncertain, and yet being a topper, what could that be but the blessings of my father and the grace of God, of course? And as for the second part of your question, Palki, the challenges, I will say that when I look back today, I've just retired, by the way, everybody. When I look back today, I'm filled with a sense of immense gratitude, even for my struggles. And I remember I opened my innings in the Foreign Service with a bang. I was a 23-year-old, wide-eyed in Paris, and Ernest Hemingway's haunting words linger with me. If you are young enough, if you are ever in Paris as a young person, then that stays with you forever, because Paris is a movable feast. And it was. And then when I look at my other assignments, I had excellent assignments, I feel, both in Delhi and abroad. At a relatively young age, I was an international civil servant at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. I was also India's first female chief of protocol, India's first female ambassador to Bhutan, and in my most recent assignment, I was India's first female representative to the UN. Of course, there were disappointments. Of course, there were disappointments, and I would be lying if I said there weren't any. But I think failure and your challenges shape you as much as your successes. And my mantra always was to move on and to concentrate on my work. And it was my greatest honor to serve the government of India with distinction. If I am permitted to enter a religious context, if I am to paraphrase Lord Krishna within the Bhagavad Gita, life and death does not matter. It is what we do with it that counts. And it is only duty or dharma that sets you free. And as far as challenges is concerned, of course, we are all aware of the challenges that women face at the workplace, the biases, the assumptions. But I do feel, and I don't know, ma'am, if you agree with me, I think it is up to us women to disprove all of that. Just a very quick story. When I was chosen to be the chief of protocol, I had a lot of colleagues ringing me up and offering me advice. Many male colleagues also. And they all advised me that, are you sure you want to do this job? It's very tough. You'll have to stand long hours. You'll have to stand in the sun. There'll be a very, very unpredictable schedule, the midnight rendezvous at the airport, the ever-present concern for safety of women. But I just kept the noise out, did my work, and when I was called in for special assignments, the 2014 swearing in, and also the 2015 India-Africa Forum Summit, I felt it was a vindication of my work, my merit. And I think what I will round this section up, I will simply say that I think if you can navigate your ship with great composure, with complete professionalism, I think anybody, any woman can do it.
Very, very well put. And I'm grateful to both of you for having shared your fears, the uncertainty that you felt at times and your struggles, because as much as it is important to celebrate the achievements, it's also important to share that it's a tough road for anyone. And if you're facing challenges, you will find a way to overcome it. Ambassador Puri, you've been a fierce advocate of feminist foreign policy. There are 13 countries that have officially adopted it. India is not one of them. but you have said in the past that India's foreign policy is very much feminist. And if I could quote, you spoke about the G20 summit, you said that was proof of our feminist foreign policy. Let me quote from your words. Using the analogy of Chandrayaan-3, India's FFP, Feminist Foreign Policy rocket, made its pioneering Nari Shakti landing through the Vikram of its G20 presidency. That's very well put, but why do you say this?
Well, I say it because what's in a name? Whether you call it feminist or not, India is overqualified to be counted among those who have adopted and acted, not only conceptualized, but acted on a feminist foreign policy. And actually they should join the club. I really feel that. Now, the G20 was a culmination of what has been happening in India with Prime Minister Modi leading the charge on gender equality and women's empowerment, right from Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao to Women's Reservation Bill now more recently, and also on all the issues of gender equality and women's empowerment, all the campaigns, all the focus, and now, of late, and it has been, I think, last term of his, Modi 2.0, there has been a focus on women-led development, from women-centered to women-led development. So what the She Shakti has been really, the Stri Shakti, Nari Shakti and She Shakti has been the center of all the socio-economic programs that he has driven, both transversal and very much targeted as well. And so we are internally in a good position to be global standard setters. And that's what we did when we had the presidency of G20. We were the only country in G20 so far to identify women-led development as a priority theme. Secondly, we made sure that in the Delhi Declaration, there was a consecration of that concept of women-led development, which is, by the way, a globally a unique concept. And that consecration was that there should be the full, effective, meaningful and equal participation of women as decision makers in all aspects of social and economic life at all levels. So this idea of women's leadership at the heart of sustainable development is something that India took forward at a global level and as I said, consecrated. The other aspect, which is very important to note, is that the Jan Bhagidari aspect, where some 300,000 women were involved in all the events and decision-making of the G20 itself. The third aspect was that the outcome document, never before has an outcome document of G20 had 2.5 pages of outcomes on gender equality and women's empowerment, and it was a bill of rights and commitments by governments on what they would do for gender equality. And then setting up as well a working group on gender equality and on women's empowerment, which will then be the vehicle for mainstreaming all the all the work that is being done, whether it's in finance, whether it's in nutrition, whether it's in health, the other working groups that are working, plus other W20s, the 20s, the labor 20, the business 20, etc., all that would be now mainstreamed by this working group. And they will also follow and monitor how G20 is delivering. Then, of course, apart from reiterating some targets, they also set a target for halving the gender digital divide. I know that there have been sessions here with women in tech. So that was one major, deliverable of this G20 summit.
Right.
And last but not least, I think what is really important is the private sector initiatives, the Empower initiatives on tech equity, on mentoring women leaders in corporate, many of you are that in corporate sector, and the care economy. This is something that I have been very passionate about, and we were very able to, put that into the Sustainable Development Goal 5 as one of the targets, that is to reduce, to value, to redistribute and reduce, and provision care, domestic and care work for women.
Right.
So to create a fund to support this whole care economy initiative. So it was a very meaningful and truly a Shakti, coming of stage for India in the G20. And that's why I said whether you call it feminist or not, it is Shakti that we represent as India.
Yes, lots of progress. I want to quickly look at some numbers. In 2018, only 15% of the world's ambassadors were women, and at the beginning of 2020, only 60 out of 190 countries in the world had a woman foreign minister at some point. Here in India, we, as Ambassador Puri just said, and we also hear the External Affairs Minister often say that there is a concerted push to have more women in the ministry. Do you see that push in India and elsewhere in the world? And what sort of societal and institutional changes do you think are needed to encourage more women to take a leadership role in international diplomacy?
Yeah, thanks, Palki. Yes, I would agree with you fully that the gender gap in international diplomacy is quite staggering. Let me add some more figures to yours. In the United Nations, out of the 193 ambassadors, less than 50 are women, 47 to be precise. And when we were in the Security Council in 2022, only 5 out of the 15 ambassadors were women. I was one of the 5. And last year, at the United Nations General Assembly, less than 12% of the speakers were women, and a fairly recent study, has also revealed that at the current rate of change, it will take at least 300 years to bridge the gender gap. So certainly we have done well, but there's much more to be done. Now, as for institutional and societal changes, I would certainly agree with you. I think we need to bring these changes. We need to dismantle the visible and the invisible barriers too. Now, as far as institutional changes are concerned, I can certainly think of mentorship. I think where you pair senior diplomats with younger officers for guidance, support and encouragement, I would say you invest greater, much more at least, in women's training, particularly in negotiations and leadership. I would also say that, something that Mrs. Puri has also mentioned, I think working environments, or rather let me put it this way, the work-life balance is very critical for working women. So fostering a work environment that is more accommodative of caregiving responsibilities, I think, would also be a very important institutional change. As far as societal changes are concerned, there are many that you can bring about. You'll have to really test and judge the pace at which you go, but I think one that comes to mind straight away is that you should dismantle the societal barriers. And importantly, also role modeling, I think, is very important. When I look at Mrs. Puri, I always think of role modeling. I think it's very important to celebrate senior women diplomats who have made it. You yourself raised the case of Ms. Muthamma, who made it despite all the odds. I think certainly building a community of support for women, that is also very critical. And investing more in education, particularly, I think, women in international relations, women in politics, women in economics, I think that would go a very long way. So I think a very comprehensive approach is required, both mentorship, societal changes, investing in education. And by the way, I will end on a very positive note. I think change is happening, certainly in India, as Mrs. Puri has already mentioned, but also internationally. Today in the United Nations, 50% of the senior management positions are being held by women. And in the United Nations also, all the 5 Nordic ambassadors today are all women. So change is happening. It is bound to happen. I think we have set sail a ship, but of course it will take some time, and I think we are on the job, all of us.
And I think in all my conversations today, one common thread that has come out is that of building a network and having women leaders enable and support other women. I had a lot more to discuss, but I'm being told that we are out of time. But I want to mention your book, ma'am. It has just come out. It's called Swallowing the Sun. It is a feminist book at its core, and it talks about a feisty woman as a protagonist who's breaking patriarchal barriers and charting her course in pre-independence India. So a word on the book. I'm going to have to wrap.
I think everyone would like to know what the protagonist, who was an embodiment and is an embodiment of Shakti, would say if she were here. And I would say that she would ask all women and girls to rise up. And you know, the title of the book is Swallowing the Sun, and it's based on an abhanga, a devotional verse of a 13th century woman saint, Muktabai,
Right.
who is worshipped as Adi Shakti, Shakti. So she said that even if you are an ant, you can fly into the sky and swallow the sun. So she would say to all women today that break your boundaries, rise above your limitations of wherever you are, and swallow the sun.
I think that's a
wonderful
note. Yes.
Thank you. But one other poem or anthem which is in the book and which she lived by is Bola havete malakayatyache pure zaanato meets maze bala. Am I not complete? Am I not complete and auspicious? Of God's purpose felicitous. It matters not to me. What is your opinion? I well know my own strength and dominion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and you're both examples of how transformative women in leadership can be. Thank you.
Ambassadors, thank you so much. Palki, thank you so much. Okay. Let's take you next to what we have planned in a few minutes from now. For our next chat, we are diving